talked about it in letters, and we talked about it on the phone. But how you really feel about it, I don't really know.
What's your take on Cassavetes? 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 Misogynist. Genius. Misogynist. Genius. Misogynist. Genius. Misogynist. Genius. What's your take on Cassavetes? What's your take on Cassavetes? What's your take on...
Welcome to There's Sometimes a Buggy, irresponsible opinions about classic film. I'm Elise.
I'm Dave.
What have we got going on this week, Dave?
This week, it's the Hollywood Studios year by year. We're talking about Warner Brothers, 1932. Got a pair of fine social problem films for you this week.
I don't know, is having a baby a social problem?
It is, because the way politics enters into the care of, and the money and the time and the personnel invested in maternity wards.
Well, certainly there is some attention to lower-class mothers, the situation
Exactly.
of lower-class mothers in this film.
And the way it intersects with the criminal justice system. And then, I'm a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, which is all about the criminal justice system, and a very, very bad criminal justice system at that.
Well, I don't think it's normally very good. Certainly not in the United States.
Well, I'm not saying it's improved much or at all in the time since then, but they recognized it for the problem that it is in 1932 at Warner Brothers.
So both of these I have seen once before with you. You have obviously seen I'm a Fugitive from a Chain Gang many times. How familiar are you with Life Begins?
Yeah, that was my second viewing of it.
Oh, did you watch that for the first time with me?
Yeah.
Where do you, discover it?
I just used my sources and looked into Warner Brothers movies from the 30s, and my goal one day is to have seen them all.
And you knew what this was about before we watched it?
Just a very, very limited summary of it.
So it was a pretty pleasant surprise for you too, then?
For sure, but I'm usually very happy with Warner films from the early 30s.
Now, the director here is... Well, actually, there's a co-director. So one of the directors is James Flood, and...
Elliott Nugent was the co-director. He's a fairly famous playwright, and he was an actor as well. And these two directors worked together, it turns out, on The Mouthpiece, which is an amazing Warren Williams film.
So it seems to me that with these two films, when we did our last MGM episode, it really felt like the studio had found its voice, so to speak, as of 1932, and it feels that way here with Warner Brothers as well, for sure.
And Paramount, those are some pretty Paramount-y films, The Lubitsch and The Mamoulian. So
Sure.
studios are all really running true to form. They're in fine fettle by 1932. The country is not. This is the worst year of the Depression.
Oh, so we're pre-New Deal here still. When is New Deal? 33?
Yep.
Okay.
So the election that brings Roosevelt to power comes in November 1932, and he doesn't actually assume the presidency until March 1933.
This is a Zanuck production. How long was Zanuck at Warner's?
Zanuck was the Warner impresario. He was in charge of everything there until, in 33, I believe, the Warner Brothers wanted to cut everyone's salary.
Mm-hmm.
Zanuck said, if you cut my people's salary, I'm resigning. They said, go ahead, we're cutting everyone's salary. So he left and started 20th Century Fox.
However, I'm a Fugitive from a Chain Gang is Harvey Wallace.
Yes, so Zanuck was the Thalberg, basically, of MGM. He was in charge of everything. He produced some things personally, and others were delegated to sub-producers. And Harvey Wallace would be the person that he never quite assumes as central a role, I don't think, as Zanuck had played in the early 30s, but he is the closest thing to Zanuck's successor.
Does Wallace not end up at Paramount at some point?
Yeah, so Wallace gets better and better, or more and more prominent throughout the 30s at Warner Brothers. He kind of comes to a crowning glory with Casablanca, leaves there, gets his own unit at Paramount, and that's where he worked primarily with Dieterle. There's so many great Dieterle movies at Paramount. And he also did Strange Love of Martha Ivers. He did some Martin and Lewis
He did the
things.
Martin and Lewis. That's how I knew that he eventually ended up at Paramount.
And the Elvis movies.
He really had his finger on the pulse of pop culture in the 50s there.
From the 30s into the 60s, yeah, Wallace pretty much stayed on top throughout that period. I prefer his 30s and 40s films.
But back to Life Begins. So this is starring Loretta Young, although she doesn't come in for quite a while. First of all, I don't know if we've seen before, I don't think we have, with Warner Brothers, seen their characteristic early 30s style of credits.
The cameo style. I think it starts now, yeah.
So no matter what the rest of the movie looks like, this is very uniform. There are all the actors in shots from the film, or outtakes, or whatever, but they look like they're from the film, and then in very plain white writing, their name and the character's name?
Yeah.
A first name, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They go pretty deep. Like, they give you not just the first 2 or 3 stars.
Yeah,
they
the
give
whole
you,
cast.
I guess there are some people that aren't included.
No, I mean the whole...
named
all the
cast.
character actors.
Yeah.
Which I guess Warner's is already going to be known for at this point.
Yeah.
Life Begins, despite having a central figure that it settles on, is definitely an ensemble movie.
Yeah, Loretta Young would be the person that they were building up as a star. I think she was still only 19 at this point, but she had been in like 30 movies already by
For
1930.
15, she looks older than 19 to me, and for 15 years she looks exactly the same, 25 or something.
Yeah, pretty much.
And she's unearthily beautiful.
She is.
Especially when she unleashes that mane of Lillian Gish long blonde hair.
Yeah.
Or Mary Pickford, or whoever. It's that long Victorian mane.
She's not going to hang out at Warner Brothers for much longer. She winds up at Fox. I guess Zanuck enticed her over there as soon as he was in charge at that studio. And it's probably for the best because she was mostly not going to be well served by what Warner Brothers was doing for the rest of the 30s, but I do like a lot of the movies she's in, and of course Taxi, with an exclamation point, is probably her best Warner film, but this one is right up there. It's really good.
When we watched this last time, I remembered liking it a lot, but I'm not even sure if I noticed when we watched it the first time that Loretta Young is a rape victim.
She was attacked. Are you thinking the baby is the product of the...
It doesn't seem like it
No.
Ultimately, I wondered about it up until the end, but at the end that would be almost a perverse reading.
Very vague. She was obviously attacked by a man.
We are meant to read between the lines, and we don't even know how she's connected to that man, but you are assuming from the conventions and from probably real-life news stories that she was his secretary. Very Biden-esque.
Oh yeah, it is, for sure.
Very relevant.
He's a well-connected ward healer.
What the hell is a ward healer?
So a ward is part of the jurisdiction for local elections, right? A healer is someone who goes around on their heels, I guess. I'm not actually sure the origin of that, but it's Heeler. They go around making promises to everyone and getting out the vote, right? This is machine politics associated with the Democratic Party primarily, which would have been running New York City for
Despite the
100
fact
years.
that this is a pro-FDR studio.
Well, FDR didn't exist yet.
At all.
Well, he was the governor of New York State.
There's no campaign yet?
When did it come out?
September 10th, 1932. Can
Okay.
you pinpoint that, Dave, with your American historical knowledge?
It's pretty easy to tell you that it's 2 months before the election. So yeah, FDR was campaigning for the presidency at this time, but that doesn't mean that you
of
can't
course
criticize the Democratic Party. FDR basically ran on a promise of completely changing what the Democratic Party stood for. It had never stood for anything like what he intended to do.
And it doesn't now.
No, it certainly doesn't.
Yes, I think they are dealing with two separate social issues here. One, women being assaulted by powerful men, sexually assaulted by powerful men, who knows exactly to what extent what occurred in this case, and then also having children while being in prison.
And women being sent to jail for defending themselves.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. So Warner's is not good on gender, as we've said before, in the way that Paramount can be good on gender, or even MGM sometimes. And we'll talk about why that is, at least during this early period of the 30s where they're really focused on although not on this film, problems of working class men, although the husbands are very prominent in this film as well.
Sure.
They are good on gender on that particular issue in this film.
Yeah, and this is something that will come up every once in a while in a 30s and 40s film, and you're just...
Well, I mean, it is a melodrama trope to think that every time a woman is attacked and defends herself, the man's going to end up accidentally dead. So that is a melodrama trope, but the fact of women who are raped not being treated well by the justice system is the bigger point.
That's what I mean, though. You know, think of I'll Be Seeing You. Ginger Rogers as well gets attacked by this rapist. He dies while she's fighting him off, and she goes to jail, and everyone acts like she did something wrong, even though they all agree that what happened is he tried to attack her, and she fought him off, and he died.
Well,
everyone understands that that's what happened.
She went to his room.
Crazy. I don't think that you would be convicted for that today, hopefully.
Well, manslaughter is manslaughter. It would be if that actually happened. I mean, they do talk about her potentially getting a pardon.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll talk about how this all shakes out in this film
Yes.
as we discuss the film in more detail. However, Loretta Young starts here a career of playing rape victims or survivors, however you like to phrase it, many times, and ultimately also said that she herself was a rape survivor.
Yeah, well, that definitely lends authenticity to her performance in The Accused, which is a really incredible movie, also with that plot line.
But also in a movie that we're surely going to do on one of our rounds of this series, which is the very interesting Employee's Entrance.
Yep, that's right.
Which is a #MeToo movie from the early 1930s.
With Warren William at his most despicable.
As a charismatic yet horrifying, psychopathic, capitalist, what do we want to call him? Bad owner. He's not an owner, he's like a executive manager. So we start out not with Loretta Young, but with all of the women representing different attitudes to motherhood in this ward of potentially troublesome cases, and obviously also not wealthy or middle-class women.
They go through triage, they're assessed when they come into the hospital, and if you maybe have some history of difficulty with previous babies, or they think that they see some potential for difficulties this time, they send you to this room. We've got Glenda Farrell, Warner Brothers mainstay of the 30s.
Playing unsympathetic, although ultimately with good cause and a heart of gold in this movie, and then rotten to the core in I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, and often she played sympathetic comedy parts.
That's what she's best known for, especially her duets with Joan Blondell. But yeah, these are two slightly different flavors for her.
There's also Aline McMahon, who is the wise and kindly nurse.
Aline McMahon, one of the great performers of the 30s, I think. It's a shame she's not better known.
We saw her in Man from Laramie, much later in her career.
We did, yeah.
And then there's also the tired and bitter nurse. Which actress was that?
I don't know her, actually. The older woman, she looked like she's in her 50s, that actress.
She's had 6 children. I think she's supposed to be a working class woman in her mid-40s. That's what I surmise.
Yeah, so this is probably her last baby, and it's not going to be an easy one, I guess. But she's been through all of this before. She's got some words of wisdom for the others.
She represents the societally approved attitude toward motherhood.
Yes.
She thinks it's the greatest experience a human being can possibly have. Although she does admit that childbirth is not that much fun to go through.
No. And we've got the free thinker. She is...
Oh yeah, the bohemian feminist intellectual. Whatever you want to call her.
Her name is Miss, not Mrs.
She's always talking about Eastern religion. I imagine she lives in Greenwich Village.
That's my thought,
She's decided to have a child on her own. But she also, being an intellectual, is going to raise this child not according to sentiment, but according to science.
She's got the 30s equivalent of Dr. Spock that she's reading from, which advises keeping your hands off your children. Don't hug them.
Well, do remember that we're coming up on a period of great concern among psychologists about mummism in America.
Yeah, this is a nice anticipation of the Nation of Vipers argument.
Everyone's going to become Mrs. Bates and turn their child into a psychopath if they kiss and hug them.
Yeah, well, she intends to avoid that pitfall, but we'll see if she's up to the task later on.
I would say that of all of the women represented here, the middle-aged mother of 6 is the one that is treated most sympathetically. Her point of view is normative, but at the same time, she's not spared satire either.
No.
Everyone is satirized at some point other than Loretta Young.
Yeah, but everyone's treated fairly gently. Ultimately, the movie cares about all of these characters, I think.
Sure. So Glenda Farrell, we didn't really talk about her situation. She is seems to be a burlesque performer.
She finds out during the early parts of the film that she is going to give birth to twins.
She's been knocked up, and she does not want this to interfere with her career, basically.
No, and one of the doctors has a pipeline to adoptive parents, and he's setting this up for her. She is disappointed to learn that she can't actually charge a fee for it. They just passed a law, and she's like, well, what good are they if you can't even charge money for them? She doesn't even want to see the kids. She just wants to get them out and get back on with her life.
I think we can see the whole time that she's putting on a front, though.
A little bit, but I wasn't so sure at the beginning. I mean, why?
No, she genuinely thinks this is an enormous inconvenience and would not have planned to do this.
Right. And once you decide that you do want to give them up...
she's pretending to be more bitter about it than she is. I mean, yeah. More nasty and callous about it.
It makes perfect sense to, if you're going to give up your children for adoption, maybe you don't want to see them.
No, of course.
Yeah.
The movie never represents the point of view that a woman could rationally decide that she doesn't want to raise her children and give them up to somebody else. That's not in its purview.
What it is saying, for sure, is that if you let a mother see her child, that's it.
And I mean, as a message about women's relationship to maternity, I think that's bad. That's very conservative and limiting. But realistically speaking, because I was thinking about this while I was watching it, and realistically speaking, if for some reason I accidentally became pregnant and had no access to abortion, forced to give birth to a child, I would probably keep it. No matter what my circumstances were. Yeah, as soon as I got a look at it, I'm not cold or callous about children, as you know. I have no desire to have any, but if I got one look at my baby, I think that would kind of be it.
Well, that's all the movie is saying. So, in theory, I agree.
But it doesn't represent one of the options being that you could just rationally decide that you don't want to raise your child for whatever reason.
Not in the range of dramatic possibilities here. You do get a sense that, like some kind of reverse Medusa, it will turn a stone heart to flesh if there is some kind of eye contact between this little glorious creature and the mother who has been through this ordeal.
Well, Glenda Farrell actually says that she thinks she's gotten religion, and the feminist Bohemian also gets religion, although it's Buddhism.
Yeah, but she immediately abandons the whole plan of not coddling and kissing.
Well, because she has planned to have a child.
Yeah, for sure.
She just wants to have it on her own. Why? I don't know why she's in this ward. They think there's an extra risk to women who don't have husbands? Who knows? We don't know why they're there.
No, the conceit of the film is that all of them, it's been determined through an examination, there's going to be some trouble. Maybe they're not dilating enough. Who knows?
Late in the game, we get the Italian immigrant mother.
Yeah.
Who doesn't speak English very well, and her husband doesn't speak it at all.
And she's had a horrifying experience, and the baby has died.
We also get a visitor from another ward.
Dorothy Peterson.
Well, I guess she represents the far extreme of Glenda Farrell really doesn't want children, and then this other woman represents wanting children so much and not being able to have them that she has apparently had a psychotic break.
Yeah, she's got phantom desire for a child. Can never be satisfied, so she's never going to be cured. That's the impression you get from the film. She's just going to be stuck in this arrested, expectant mother situation. And she says, as long as people continue to refuse to believe that I'm having a baby, it's never going to happen.
So the film's range of women's attitudes towards maternity, we've just given the spectrum there.
The other woman that we haven't mentioned at all, and I don't remember her name, and it's really more her husband that is the center of their story. Frank McHugh, his wife.
She's just like a normal young woman. But Frank McHugh is a wreck.
Yeah, Ringer Banks is his name. He's going through all kinds of hell, and Aline McMahon tries to deflect his anxieties. She sends him off on errands.
Now, all of her strategies work out well. But with this one, I was getting a little worried because he seemed like he was getting so desperate that he was going to start shooting pharmacists if they wouldn't let him have this can of ether.
Which he can't get without a prescription. She knew that. She just wanted him out of the hospital for an hour or two.
I really thought this was going to turn into the scene at the beginning of Mikey and Nicky where Peter Falk goes insane on the guy at the coffee shop.
Or Jack Nicholson in 5 Easy Pieces.
But no.
No,
we pull back from that edge.
This is Frank McHugh. He's a lovable comedy guy. Even when he's frustrated, the worst he'll do is knock over something on the counter at the pharmacy.
Not jump over the counter and start beating up the pharmacist.
No.
So the father's, well, he is treated comically as a father who...
But he also, he's got that scene where he finally actually sits down with her after she's had the baby. It's actually very tender.
But it is touch and go in that we are not certain either how well this mother is going to do.
No, they're all in danger of some kind or other. There's a chance they're going to die, any of them.
At a certain point, I was thinking of this as because it gets pretty grim about midway through, and I was thinking of this as the King Lear of maternity ward movies. I mean, they keep emphasizing, right with the title, that this is the beginning of life. Right here, we are witnessing the beginning of life, and yet there is so much sorrow and tragedy and potential for tragedy going on. That is the stuff that life is made of, according to this film.
Yeah, that's right. It's no picnic.
And yet, at the end, the desire to continue to live asserts itself. The life force asserts itself.
And out of the people that we meet, we have had 2 deaths. We have the Italian couple's baby and Loretta Young.
Yeah, spoilers. I actually forgot.
Oh, really?
Well, you know how it is when you see a film once, you can actually... And there's a sort of Schrodinger's cat scenario. One of 2 endings are equally possible.
Yeah.
And yeah, they do go for the tragic ending.
There's a C-section that does not succeed in saving the mother.
Yeah, like in Farewell to Arms.
Yeah, that's right.
Although that doctor was way more confident than this doctor is.
A really rough scene where they are basically presenting the husband with the options, and they say it's not so simple as choose one or the other, but choose one or the other.
That's exactly what the doctor says. And who are these other people? Like, is this the top hospital administrators standing around too, or who are these other men?
For any conversation like that, you want a few people around so that you have backup later on.
Yeah, but they just go ahead and do the opposite of what he says anyway.
Well, because the mother woke up and they were able to talk to her and record her reaction.
That's what they say afterwards, but these guys are leaving their meeting with him and saying, I don't know, I don't like his answer. We should go with the mother even though she's delirious.
No, it's true. They actually called him in hoping he would rubber stamp their determination to go ahead, do a C-section, save the baby, let the mother probably die.
So what do you think is happening with, why include this scene of the father's consultation? What is the dramatic decision there?
I guess there's a bunch of considerations. You probably don't want a sympathetic husband to agree to kill his wife.
Yeah, but then why have him consulted at all?
Because
well, sure, Rock Hudson isn't consulted in A Farewell to Arms.
No, but in this case, I think they've shown this guy, this hysterical guy from the beginning. He's trying everything he can to get assurance that his wife will get the best treatment. His wife, who has been languishing in prison just for defending herself against a rapist, and she's not coming out for probably 20 years.
Yeah, but so in order to get this ending of pathos, and to make the choice of killing your protagonist in childbirth, I feel like they have to kind of twist and distort things a little bit, in that these doctors are very ambiguous. They are very certain that this woman's life is worthless because she's going to be in prison.
Yeah, exactly.
And that doesn't seem like very good political stance for Warner Brothers to be taking. So I actually think at this point that the movie's dramatic decisions are working against its political message.
I don't know if you need to feel like the doctors are correct.
But they're nice and they're authoritative. There's no giveaway that the doctor is wrong.
That scene with the husband, you need to have him insist, save my wife, even if the child will die, because otherwise, at the end, you don't have any kind of reversal when he finally does agree to take the child in his arms.
That's what I mean, like the dramatic reversal, like Glenda Farrell's.
Yeah.
So the magic of the child works on him, too, despite his gender.
Yeah, children work on everyone, it seems.
But for him, it's very important that This could be read in a creepy way, but we won't do that. They have this conversation when they are first able to talk to each other, after Eileen McMahon arranges for that.
Oh, that was amazing, that scene.
Where they get rid of the prison matron.
Yeah, so she comes in and she's barking regulations at Eileen McMahon. She says...
treating her in an inhuman fashion.
Yeah, and she says, Loretta Young's allowed to see her husband exactly twice. You monitor all of it. Make sure that it doesn't happen more than that. She doesn't deserve it. She's a convict. Wheel her in there.
And Eileen McMahon is like, we don't work for the penal system.
Yeah. But while the matron is there, she's like, of course, we'll mistreat her as much as you like. And, she's just basically sycophanting all of it. And because you just know Eileen McMahon from all the other movies you've seen her in as a Warner Brothers fan, that this is not really how she feels. And she's just being two-faced with this creep. It's great.
Yeah, well, she says whatever she needs to get people to do what she needs them to do.
Go back to the prison, forget about it. Miss Bowers is in charge, and then Miss Bowers is in charge, and she's like, you come every single moment you can, spend every minute, forget about visiting hours, just come over.
Anyway, they have this conversation where they agree that they want the child to be a girl, so that he will be left with a piece of her, a new version of her.
Right.
And that's what he gets at the end. It's actually very moving. I did cry at the end thinking of that discussion.
Those doctors, did you notice that 2 of the doctors are also in I'm a Fugitive from a Chain Gang?
No, I didn't. Are they the prison guards, or?
The doctor the guy with the glasses who is the main one outlining the choice, he is the brother, Clint.
The Reverend?
Yeah. And then the other guy, the more leading man looking...
Wow, that's obviously a very good character actor. They couldn't be 2 more different characters.
He's got the same voice, and he's also kind of stuffy.
But he's completely goofy in I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang. That's like a broadly comic performance. What is his name? Let's get his name.
Hale Hamilton. The other guy is Preston Foster, the doctor that looks more like a leading man. You see him actually picking up the Italian wife and putting her on the cot. He is the guy that robs the lunch wagon.
Oh, yeah!
Preston Foster.
I can see that.
And he becomes not a big star, but a leading man, a star of movies in the mid-30s.
Okay.
And he has a pretty good long career in noir as well. He's in Kansas City Confidential in the 50s. That's a great one.
What can we say about this movie?
Like most Warner Brothers films, it takes a very jaundiced view of corrupt politics. And it has no time for reverence for institutions.
No, I meant the texture of the film itself. I'm just thinking about, the rapport, the tension and the rapport that develops between the women in the ward, obviously. Particularly a lot of interactions between Glenda Farrell. Well, they form different units at different times. Once Loretta Young is in the ward, she kind of forms a unit with the woman in her mid-40s, although she does manage to insult her by calling her an old thing.
Yep.
That woman has been having, obviously, tension with Glenda Farrell, and Glenda Farrell kind of forms a unit with the feminist intellectual, who kind of consoles her and brings her around to a better point of view, as the older woman does with Loretta Young.
There's some very interesting pairings in there, and Glenda Farrell sort of takes center stage for part of it after she gets tanked up on liquor that she has stored in her hot water bottle.
Well, yeah, there are 2 climaxes. Well, it kind of all comes to a head with the death of the Italian woman's baby, and then the woman from the psych ward shows up again, this time having kidnapped a baby.
Yeah.
Oh, that was quite interesting for the progressive attitude expressed by Eileen McMahon, although not by the feminist intellectual, but then again it was her baby, about the woman not being dangerous.
There could be an accident. I mean, you can't just leave her alone with a baby that she has grabbed out of the maternity ward, but she certainly has no malicious intentions. You can't leave
anyone alone with a baby that they've grabbed out of a maternity ward.
I don't want that responsibility.
Yes, but as Eileen McMahon says, she loves babies. She's not intending to harm it. Or whatever. She's not just going to suddenly go psycho and tear its head off.
No, not at all.
And eat it. Although that's kind of how the mother reacts. So that was interesting for the time period, again.
And it's also quite interesting, the solidarity between the women. Pretty much all of them, they know Loretta Young because of newspaper stories. So everyone was following this case, presumably. Everyone is convinced that she shouldn't have gone to jail for this, and that this man deserved to die, and she was just protecting herself.
I'm sure women mostly do have solidarity with each other on these issues when they don't have anything political to gain by dismissing a woman's charges against a powerful man.
Again, it's quite something to show that out of this seemingly random sampler of women from across different parts of society, everyone agrees she should be a free woman. She should not be in jail, but she is, because the world doesn't work the way people want it to work.
Our one glimpse of non-common people is pretty characteristically Warner Brothers.
Yeah, these are disgusting scum.
Wealthy people who essentially are, whether they're for sale or not legally, essentially are buying these children and don't want the defective one. Want to put the defective one in the state home.
Eugenics freaks.
Yeah.
And that was really great, right? Because that's the catalyst for Glenda Farrell's...
Yeah, before she even... embraces the child, actually looks at the child. It's really class-based that she's going to defend her baby against these women, and then she gets a look at it and gets religion, as she says.
Yeah, this horrible wasp, that's it. That gets the Warner blood up and brings out the maternal superhero in Glenda Farrell. She grabs the child back, desperately tries to breathe life into this struggling infant girl.
Yeah, and she starts getting coached by the Bohemian, who starts, pulling out her grandmother's wisdom. Now, no more Dr. Spock books.
Oh yeah, but how about her line when they wheel her in, when they say, oh, who knows, your baby could be president, and she's like, well, I hope not, I'm gonna raise the child right.
Yeah. So it's just, besides the performers, the real strength of this movie is its constantly surprising screenplay, and it's bringing together of all these characters, basically none of whom would ever be the star of any, the protagonist of any movie, even at Warner Brothers.
No, probably not.
A real motley crew of odds and ends from across the lower social spectrum, or just disreputable, like Miss Bohemian Greenwich Village.
Yeah, and Glenda Farrell. Florette Darien is her character's name.
Right, I was thinking of her as the Courtney Love role.
Yeah, sure, why not? If they remake this...
Courtney could have played it.
They did remake it in 1939.
Courtney's getting a little bit long in the tooth to be playing an expectant mother, but...
Probably.
She could have made it in the 90s, for sure. It would have been great.
Oh, yeah.
It would have been amazing. They should have remade this film for Courtney Love, but they did remake it, and now you and I want to see the remake because it looks interesting. It has a Robert Rawson screenplay.
Great writer.
1939.
It's got Geraldine Fitzgerald and Gail Page and Spring Byington and all kinds of other people in it.
So I was quite taken by Eric Linden, who gets quite a big role here.
He's
a Tobey Maguire resembling juvenile.
Sure, I guess I could see that. He is the husband of Loretta Young, who is understandably very concerned from the beginning. She's been languishing in jail. She's lost the desire to live, even, which is understandable.
She's been attacked by a fuck.
And then condemned to jail for 20 years for not accepting his terrible advances.
So this fellow obviously did not ultimately have too much of a memorable career, didn't play many other...
He has a good number of credit throughout the 30s, though.
He does. I'm not going to say he didn't get to play any other interesting leading man parts because I am not familiar with these films. Maybe some of them are just as good as this one.
They're all pretty small movies. Some of them I've seen or heard of.
However, by 1939, he is reduced to playing Amputation Case in Gone with the Wind. I wonder if he's the amputation case. He must be, the one that Scarlett runs screaming out of there with a giant shadow on the wall.
Right.
Remember that?
Yeah, I guess it might be him.
It's a very memorable performance, but not as memorable as this one.
No.
This movie seemed to get mixed to good reviews. Variety liked it. We actually found a contemporary review here. So it was based on a play by Mary M. Axelson. I can't find out anything else about her other than this review, which apparently opened in New York and ran just 1 week, despite a definite degree of favorable word of mouth among the women who saw it. And it says Warner's paid $6,000 for it, so there you have the exact amount.
Well, that's a good figure.
The Variety staff goes on to say, as a film that ignores much of the comedy which it held as a play, it's become a sober screen discourse, so I guess that's the Warner's social messaging influence there.
Yeah, but I thought it was pretty pretty funny at times.
There is one cast retention from the play. Yeah, it is very comic for something being so sober. There's one cast retention from the play, Glenda Farrell. So there you go.
I wonder if this is where she gets her start. I don't really remember her being in movies before 1932.
And as we say, she hasn't really found her screen persona yet.
What she does here is part of her screen persona. It's actually a wider range of emotions than she usually gets to display.
Variety staff also absolutely loves Eileen McMahon.
Well, who doesn't?
Poor Loretta Young doesn't get singled out at all in this, despite being the heroine and despite dying. Actually, but I found Young very effective in that. I found it interesting that once she comes in, despite her coming in late to the movie and the ward, for a good chunk, we see the other characters from her perspective, and her perspective is very empathetic, and Young is very good at playing that.
Yeah.
To be being tenderly empathetic.
No, I'm a Loretta Young fan, for sure. She only gets better as the years go ahead, but she's very competent right from the beginning.
She's very likable already, and very emotional.
I love her in Platinum Blonde.
No, I don't remember that movie well
The
enough.
Capra film. She plays the best friend reporter character while the Robert Williams protagonist is obsessing on Jean Harlow. On to I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, Warner Brothers' most acclaimed film of 1932, one of their signature achievements during this pre-code era.
So, right away, we're in a different world here. In terms of the filmmaking, I assume that Warner's must have considered this an A picture and put a lot of money behind it, as well as, like, did Mervyn Leroy already have a reputation as a top director at Warner's at this point?
Yeah, he was their go-to director for prestige projects in the early 30s. Really all the way until he left the studio in 1937, I believe, was when he left. But I don't think it was a very, very expensive film, but it looks beautiful.
And you know who is somewhat responsible for that?
Saul Polito?
Saul Polito. Right off the bat, the cinematography is extraordinary in this movie. It is such a good-looking movie, and it really reaches some expressionistic heights during the beating scene. So Saul Polito, I knew that name because of...
Oh, he's a Warner Brothers mainstay.
He sure is, but the reason I would have noticed his name is because he did the cinematography on Now Voyager.
Oh, right.
And we're always looking for who is the auteur of Now Voyager. Can it be Irving Rapper? Is it Betty Davis? Is it Olive Higgins Prouty? But definitely Saul Polito is the candidate because that movie has some of the most adventurous, as well as just great-looking cinematography I can think of in 1940s Hollywood cinema. I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang. What's the context of this movie, Dave?
So again, this is another Zanuck ripped from the headlines story. He basically just got up in the morning, looked in the newspaper, and he was like, could this turn into a social problem film? A big money maker for Warner's? Should we tackle this subject? Is there a play or a book on this topic? Let's get it. Let's film it. This movie, we're looking at the release date here. It came out November 10th, 1932. So basically right as the election was happening.
So apparently I Am a Fugitive from a Georgia Chain Gang.
Yep.
They took Georgia right out of the title there.
They did.
It was first serialized in True Detective Mysteries magazine, although it is apparently a true account.
It is, and the author, Robert Burns, was on the run from the authorities while this was made. Georgia marshals showed up on the set of the film looking for him because they knew he was serving as an advisor.
Wow.
And he had to lam out of there.
And did this film help him?
I don't think it helped him. I don't think he was ever brought back there, right? Because as you see in this film...
Yeah, but did he... Well, let's look this up. Did he ever, regain any kind of social position?
That part
You're
I'm not
kidding
sure
me.
about.
Pause. Okay, so now for the first time we know what happened to Burns. So the movie led him to make more public appearances, condemning the use of chain gangs in the South, which led to his rearrest in Newark about a year after the movie came out. However, the governor of New Jersey refused to extradite him. He requested a pardon in 1943, so much later, but I guess he got money from the movie and the book.
Yeah, so he wasn't stealing.
And eventually the board commuted Burns' sentence to time served. However, he died from cancer in 1955.
At what age? 63. Not the
greatest.
No.
Could be better.
As you see from this film, we're Canadians, right? Just in case listeners don't recall. You can't just summon someone from New Jersey or from Illinois back to Georgia if they're wanted only by state authorities in Georgia. That's not the case in Canada. Criminal justice system is federal.
Yeah, and obviously this could work in your favor or against you, as we see, because
once you're back in Georgia, no one can do anything.
You're fucked.
Yeah. This is something that gets remarked upon quite often. Warner Brothers did not have theaters in the South.
So they could criticize the South all they wanted to.
And they did.
And they did.
Now, they did make, like everyone in the late 30s, they did make some movies that look a little bit more kindly upon the South than there was any reason to do, like, let's say, Jezebel. Although Jezebel is far more critical of the Lost Cause mythology than Gone with the Wind. It's still got some fucking problems.
Well, it's got, terrible stereotype characters.
Yeah.
Although, there's one okay one, but mostly it's awful.
Yeah, exactly. But in this one, and in things like They Won't Forget, Warner Brothers is basically saying we don't care what the South thinks of us because we have no theaters there anyway.
Even though they do take Georgia out, and they never refer to the state.
No, they don't, but they show a map. They show where he's headed, and he's going towards Georgia on the map.
So, Paul Muni, our hero here, apparently he was originally signed to Fox and didn't do so well. He grew up performing in the Yiddish theater.
Yep.
So after his unsuccessful initial movie career, he returned to Broadway and starred in Counselor at Law.
Great vehicle for John Barrymore on camera. I'm sure it was a great play as well.
So his return to Hollywood had him appearing in much more prestigious films, such as I'm a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, and in the same year, Scarface, Howard Hawks' Scarface.
And then he becomes the central figure in the Dieterle Warner Brothers biopic series, and he wins an Oscar, and Life of Emile Zola wins the Best Picture Oscar in 1937, and then it all culminates with Juarez, which I think is the best one, but that one didn't do so well at the time.
So yes, looks gorgeous right away. I was concerned, the dialogue is terrible, just terrible. I wonder if it was lifted directly from his book.
Oh, I love it.
Oh, it's awful. Like, all this elevated flowery language and all of this non-grammatical flowery language, like referring to yourself as we instead of us. These message-heavy speeches, but luckily there's almost none of that.
I agree it's not the central appeal of the film. It's more the
little interchanges between the characters, that's fine. But the film is primarily visual in its drama.
I don't know, I love the dialogue at the chain gang, like, when he sits down to his first breakfast.
Oh yeah, that was good. It's whenever he's making, speeches explaining his position that it could have been better, but it makes me cringe.
It gets a little rhetorical, but
very rhetorical.
I don't know, that's part of the appeal of the film, I think.
So his first Brechtian rhetorical speech to his mother and brother about how now that he's back from the war, he can't be tied down to a boring shipping clerk office job.
Well, his brother says, aren't you glad you can now settle down and become a soldier of peace instead of a soldier of war? It's so good.
Oh yeah, this completely hilarious, out-of-touch reverend.
Oh man.
Just a complete dick, and is actually, even more than Glenda Farrell, responsible for him being caught.
Yeah.
When he tries to go back to civilian life. When he makes that speech about how he has to get out and construct and build things and try his manhood in the world and whatever.
I want to get into a bildungsroman.
I was not looking forward to the movie, but it's actually not like that at all. It's not like that at all. It's not what you're gonna expect.
No, not at all. But one thing I do want to say about Clint, the brother, he is just a complete idiot.
Yep.
But the film somehow manages, I guess, the actor's responsible for that. He does manage to convince me that he really does care about his brother.
Oh yeah, he believes everything he says. He's just a complete fucking idiot.
Like, he's not a hypocrite.
No.
In most movies, this character would be a hypocrite, and I don't think that would help.
So it's actually, it is kind of unique in being a criticism of organized religion that doesn't have a hypocritical religious figure.
Yeah, like, he is working night and day. Paul Muni acknowledges that. He thinks his brother is wrong, and a goofball, but they do have some kind of a bond between them, and everything's being done in good faith. He's completely...
He's overly conventional and overly optimistic.
And he doesn't have to work in a factory. He just thinks that seems like a fine arrangement.
I was also curious about the class status of this family because they live in an enormous middle-class house. But again, Paul Muni works in a factory, but he works as a clerk. It's like a semi-white-collar job, right?
Yeah.
He's in charge of the invoices, basically.
Yeah.
He just thinks it's boring compared to engineering, which is what he's been taught in the army.
Yeah, no, he's not one of the lowest rung of industrial employees. He was clearly on track for middle
kind of
management.
Yeah.
And that's not what he wants. He wants to be in an engineering firm. He doesn't mind starting at the bottom, and he really starts at the bottom. This is after he is gonna be fired anyway, probably, because he's not even showing up on time for work. The mother, I guess that's one of the speeches you didn't like, where the mother is like, he must go and find himself.
No, I thought that was fine.
Oh, okay.
It's whenever he talks that it's a problem. It probably is, lifted right from the book. This guy putting this language into his own mouth.
But here, right away, once that is over with, we get into the montage work, and we see him rolling all across the United States, up, down, east, west, north, south.
So he's like Frank Capra was briefly, but with much less luck. He is one of the forgotten men. They come back from World War I. Some of them have college degrees, like Capra did in engineering, or some of them were highly trained, highly educated in the army, and then they can't find not only any decent jobs, but not any jobs at all, and they turn into tramps.
There are two things going on here. This is a movie made in 1932. The unemployment rate was over 25% at that time.
Hasn't the United States about hit that now again?
We're going to have to see if it sustains at that level, then we are going to be in the worst economic situation since the Great Depression.
However, if everything reopens, we're going to have, a convulsive series of illnesses and deaths.
Yeah. So, but at that time, this was obviously the central fact of life in the United States. But what they're hearkening back to is the time right after World War I, and there was a pretty major economic downturn at that time as well. It didn't sustain itself after 1920, I believe. Certainly by the mid-20s, we're into the jazz age and the roaring economy and the stock market going crazy, and employment figures were pretty good. So the movie is dealing with the unemployment situation semi-historically, because there was a problem in 1919, 1920. So it's feasible, but really they're talking about what life is like in 1932.
So when I said the movie is not like that, it's not actually annoyingly didactic message picture. What I mean is two things. First of all, it is a very visual film, as I've already pointed out, but also, more than any noir from the 1940s, it's this terrifying journey into the void, this Kafkaesque Foucauldian nightmare Twilight Zone episode where every time you turn around, you're making some decision that lands you by accident in hell, being overseen by cruel, sadistic masters.
Yeah, and the villain is the state. The villain is the constituted authorities, and they are never exposed. No one is ever brought to justice. Paul Muni is on the run at the end of the film, and he has no one to fight his battle for him. He has lost. There's nothing to do about this. It really does. I feel like it is one of the closest things you're going to get to a revolutionary film made under the Hollywood studio system.
So the way this all shakes out is there are several sort of episodes or acts. First of all, he goes out to try his luck as an engineer, which ought to be fine, except he just happens to be looking for work in a field where he has experience, but only in the army, which isn't always recognized.
Right.
And he just happens to hit recession, as you say, right? And so he can't find, ultimately, any kind of work at all. And so he becomes a tramp.
Yeah, at first we see he takes a steamship from Boston to New Orleans. He's got enough money to fund his wanderings at first. He takes a train, then he's eventually boxcar hopping, and then he's just walking the ties when he finally lands himself in the major criminal jeopardy of the film.
Sure, where this hardened criminal
Well, he's living in a flop house at this point. We see the rates, we see signs up saying silence, 15 cents for a bed, 15 cents for meals, 5 cents for a bath. And there's a guy playing solitaire, it's Preston Foster. He seems like a good guy. He has a comradely attitude towards his fellow sufferers.
It looks like it's going to be a kind of sentimental depression scene where he says, "Oh, I know this soft touch will give us a burger."
Yeah.
And Paul Mooney's just like, "Wow, I can't believe this. This sounds, beyond my wildest dreams."
Yeah. Oh, there was also that scene right before when he's in St. Louis where he goes to a pawn shop and tries to pawn his Croix de Guerre, and the pawn shop guy says, "Hey, let me show you something." He's got like a case full of these medals.
So he's not the only veteran in this situation.
They're all fucked. And these are the people that are going to be part of the bonus army in 1933, which Gold Diggers of 1933 harkens back to in the Remember My Forgotten Man number.
Doesn't it blow your mind, though, that Frank Capra studied engineering, like George Bailey, could have become an engineer, that's what he was planning to do, and then because of this situation, stumbled into filmmaking and happened to be a genius at it. Like, what? That's what could happen to Hollywood. That's why Hollywood is actually exciting during the studio era, because this sort of thing could happen.
Well, that's some of the fun stuff in The Name Above the Title, where he actually shows up in San Francisco, where they were making a movie, and he just tells them, "I'm from Hollywood." And they give him a job as a production assistant.
I thought he started editing like everybody else.
He was assisting on the production. Maybe he was doing edits. I don't remember. But he bluffed his way into it, yeah.
Okay, so that's like Act 1.
Lunch wagon, where they go. I mean, this scene is incredible. It's so beautifully shot, runs the gamut of emotions here, right? You've got this nice guy.
Well, but already it's not the scene that we were picturing. The movie scene of depression sentiment that we were picturing. The guy really does seem to want them to go away.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's
he's
bad
like,
for
"You're
business."
here. He's like, "You're here every day. I'm giving you free meat."
Yeah.
Like, I wish you would leave town. He seems to really mean it.
They sit down. Preston Foster, he's got this real sort of bon vivant attitude. Quite a nifty little performance from him, because he does come across as the charismatic leader of the pack of hobos kind of guy that everyone loves. And then as soon as the lunch wagon is empty and the last paying customer has left, he turns immediately into a snarling gunman.
Yeah.
How good is business? He turns the gun on Paul Muni and says, "You're my assistant now. This is why I wanted you along. Go into that cash register, grab the money."
This is the first noir nightmare detail, right? Where you didn't even do it.
Yeah.
I didn't even do it. And I'm arrested.
He doesn't even get to have his hamburger, and Paul Muni gets a lot of mileage out of ogling that burger as it fries.
So he just falls out of the social caste that he was supposed to belong to, the safe social case that he initially belonged to. He just falls out of it through accident, and then through another accident goes down a further circle of hell.
Yeah, the denouement to this robbery scene is just horrifying. Preston Foster pulls the telephone wire out, says, "Don't go calling the cops." He stumbles out of there, and the cops are just standing there and shoot him to death immediately.
$5.
Paul Muni tries to run away. What else are you going to do when the cops are running at you with their guns drawn? They drag him off to court, where he gets absolutely no sympathetic ear from this fucking judge.
Even though it's his first offense.
Yeah, the judge says, "I see no reason for leniency in this matter," gavels down on him, and we cut. This is one of the little dissolves that Mervyn Leroy likes to do in this film. The gavel transforms into the man hammering out shackles on the chain gang.
He just happens to have the bad luck for this, on top of everything else, for this to have happened in a southern state.
Which still uses the chain gang system of labor, which is clearly a leftover from slavery.
Right, and I mean the film, through its imagery and music, the work songs that the men are playing, really hammers that home.
Yes, sledgehammers that home.
This is still slavery. Everyone here, white or black, and it is mixed, is a slave.
Yeah.
They're working on the railway ties, and they are also
breaking rocks in a quarry.
Breaking rocks. So this is all... Okay, so here's what I don't quite understand. I know that people are now criticizing prisons or for sometimes allowing private companies or private prisons exploiting convict labor by paying them almost nothing, much lower than they'd be able to legally get away with.
They're basically just working for a few pennies and their room and board.
But other than that, has the use of labor been abolished? Like, hard labor is no longer a sentence that you can get?
Oh, I don't know.
Oh, you don't know? Okay, I don't know either.
I don't think it's been abolished.
But here, these men are, in fact, working on projects, I guess. Well, is it for private industry? Is it for government?
They would work on license plates. They would work on roads. So yeah, they were doing public works.
Okay.
And the government doesn't have to really pay them except for maintaining the prison.
Clearly, the chain gang has been abolished, but I don't know if...
They have to be remunerated a little better than getting nothing, but I don't think that they get that much.
I was just wondering what other prison conditions there were that made this outstanding as in its cruelty.
I think it's mostly the chain gang aspect of it.
Just the fact that they are brutally chained.
Yes. And the free use of corporal punishment, I don't think, is standard. Certainly not on the law books at the time.
Anyway, so then we get a tour, as we're talking about, of these prison conditions. We get a glimpse of them being chained and being put to their labor, and anyone who is sick as a result of their food and their labor conditions is punished extra because they're not putting in a good day's work.
Yeah, because they're considered to be malingering, right? So...
Well, it's not even possible that these guards literally believe this. It's like a mind game of... We must pretend that if you are not performing your role as a unit of capital, basically, that we are exploiting, or a labor unit that we're exploiting, then we have to pretend that this is on purpose, even though we can clearly see that it's not, because that's the only role that you have to serve.
Yeah, they don't really lead us to understand that there are provisions made for people who are incapacitated by illness. You just have to go out there and do your daily work regardless.
You don't exist except to perform this work for others.
And to shut up. Yeah.
Which is, kind of does transform it into a metaphor for capitalism.
Oh, definitely. They're being exploited to the max here, kept under
Capitalism doesn't allow for, for example, in many cases, state mandated and paid sick days.
No.
Which is causing a real problem right now.
That's right. And we meet the whole crew, the nucleus of friends that he will bond with under these conditions. You've got Alan Jenkins, who is another Warner's mainstay, Barney.
Right.
And you've got Edward Ellis. This is a great performance. His name is Balmer in this movie. He's probably best known either for this or for Wynant. He plays Wynant in The Thin Man, the dad who causes all the story to get going in the first Thin Man film.
Okay.
A senior citizen who has been through hell, clearly, and he is still alive to snicker at the futility of life on the chain gang.
We also learned that it seems to be almost entirely random who has been assigned to hard labor because Paul Muni. I guess
everyone.
It was armed robbery.
Yeah, no, I think it's just everyone.
Because there is a guy there who has murdered 3 female relatives.
Yeah, with an axe.
Yeah.
And he laughs about it. Man, what a freak.
So Muni has to put up with this company.
Yep.
As well as everything else. And his food looks like the Eraserhead baby cut up.
So it's grease, pig fat,
yeah, those two are distinguished from each other, the grease and the pig fat.
We get 2 opinions on this. I think it's Alan Jenkins says you won't find any better food on any chain gang in the state, and Edward Ellis says, well, you can look all across the world and you won't find anything worse.
Yeah. The food was... I have read about prison conditions even recently in North America, and the food is considered part of the punishment. They don't want it to taste good.
No, I'm sure they don't. And they probably don't cater to gluten-free diets either.
Right.
Or vegetarian diets.
You'll just be one of the sickies, and you'll have the guy with the hat come at you with his giant belt.
Yeah. So Red is the very sickly guy who, we don't know how long he's been there, what he was like when he got there, but he's unable to eat the first morning that Muni sits down.
And he puts his head down in despair, right?
Yeah. This is, I guess, a lesson to Paul Muni that he better start to like this food and keep eating it. Otherwise, he's just going to get weaker and weaker and expire.
And instead of anyone telling you what the routine is, the first time...
They just hit you until you do it right.
The first time Paul Muni wakes up and doesn't even know what the hell is going on, and he's not waking up in the proper way, the prison guard comes and knocks him off his bed and then hits him in the face with a chain. So the Sadian brutality depicted throughout this film of the prison guards is very effective.
It is, and there's no humanization of these people.
Oh, they seem like plausible human types.
No, I know, but you just don't ever see them out of character. That's what I'm saying.
It's true, but you know what? There's also no melodramatization of them. They really just seem like they know their role that they have to serve. They don't seem to be getting any extra, like, sweaty graphic pleasure out of what they're doing.
No, it's not like the character in Sullivan's Travels. He is more of a self-inventing kind of character. Or the creep that runs the prison farm in Dust Be My Destiny. Those guys seem like the architects of their own evil supervillain persona.
This is just the banality of evil.
Yeah, they're functionaries. It's true.
And they're performing the role that the state wants them to.
And they're all the same. Yeah, no one is nicer or less nice. They're all just uniformly
Although
monstrous.
There is one who has the role of doling out the beltings.
Yeah, that's David Landau. And that guy, man, that actor is so unbelievably hateable. In a lot of Warner films in the 30s, and rarely anything but this kind of a monster does he play. He's the dad in Street Scene. I don't know if you recall him. He's quite a monster, but also somehow a pathetic figure as well at the end of that movie.
No, I don't remember the movie well enough.
Ah, okay.
It's also ironic that Paul Muni wanted to get away from the army because this is probably, with less intense cruelty, the kind of routine and discipline that he experienced there, as well as the barracks living.
We see him go through all of those, right? So, army, terrible life. Factory, terrible life. Chain gang, terrible life exponentially. Because there's no escape from it. You can't even go home at the end of the terrible day.
And when he tries to stand up for the sickly guy, he learns right away that no ethical outbursts will be permitted.
No, absolutely not. That is a challenge to the system, and he has to be beaten first. And this is where he impresses all of the guys because he does not scream. And it's actually a key scene, right? Because this probably got around the camp and probably led to
people approaching him or agreeing to help him.
Yeah, Sebastian probably was like, well, I've heard that this guy can take the lash without screaming, so probably I can help him by hitting his shackle and he won't scream.
Ah, interesting. I didn't even notice that detail.
Well, we'll get more to that when we approach that part of the plot.
So this is an extraordinarily expressionistic scene, the beating scene, where we don't actually see it delivered. We see shadows and we see the pattern of the bars and the light. Muni waits and watches.
The previous guy come out with blood all over his back, and then they drag Paul Muni in there with his white back. And you know that that's a canvas for this monster to work on.
To do his abstract expressionist work on.
Yeah, the banal monster, yeah.
So this guy is, every bit as nervy, this escape artist, as Robert Bresson's protagonist, and a man condemned to death escape. But Bresson is more interested in freedom in the abstract than in suffering of the body is more the theme of Diary of a Country Priest.
The next key scene, I guess, is when Barney leaves and Red leaves. They leave together on the same day. Barney, his time is up, his sentence is up, and we see Alan Jenkins shambling out. He says he can't walk properly without the chains anymore. And they say, oh, Red's leaving today too. And he's in a pine box. And that shot where Barney hitches a ride on the truck, lights his cigarette on the coffin, and quite something. Edward Ellis sums all of that up with, you can work out or you can die out. Those are your choices here. Paul Muni, he wants a third option.
Right.
And he starts talking about it with everyone who will listen.
Also, if this happened the way he depicts it in his true-to-life story, he would be one of the few... Well, I don't know if that's true. Probably not. I was going to say he would be one of the few middle-class guys there, but I guess at a time when all of these men from the army were turning into tramps, maybe that's not actually true.
Edward Ellis says, it's been done. If you really want to take a chance, why not? It's better than life here. But you gotta be smart. You gotta really study the problem and come up with a foolproof escape hatch for yourself. We see the calendars flip by. Presumably there's been a lot of watchful attentiveness. We've already been introduced, and that was a great little moment as well. Edward Ellis points out Sebastian, and he says, look at him swing that sledge. They like his work so much.
They're gonna keep him here forever. So that's a bit of a comment.
I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what he's done. They're gonna keep him here. They'll find some pretext for extending his sentence until he can't swing the sledge anymore and is no longer useful.
And this is a young, healthy-looking man. This is not, like, the life that he should be leading.
No. You have to file that away when you see that, and then, of course, this character returns in a very important role in the escape. Paul Muni, his nerve is fully realized here. He approaches Sebastian and he says...
Sebastian, I believe, calls him Sir when he answers him, which I guess would make sense since this is supposed to be the South.
Yes, that would be the safe thing to do.
Even for a fellow prisoner.
Apartheid system of that time. Yeah. He says, can you swing your sledgehammer and hit my tie around my ankle so that you can warp it so that I can actually slip out of it whenever I need to at some future date.
He says, I sure would like to see you get out of this misery.
Yeah, which is amazing, right? Yeah. Like, of course, there's solidarity here. People will do whatever they can for each other.
Didn't we see him with black fellow officers in the army? There is one.
Well, there was one.
Shown.
He wasn't actually shown in a good light, though. They're kind of making fun of him at the end of that scene.
Yeah, it's true. But anyway, the point being that he would have been in an integrated situation. No. Well, then what is...
Well, that might be a troop transport, but there were no integrated army units in the
Then Warner's
is
States. Actually going out of their way to include that character.
Yeah. Now, it's possible on a troop transport at the end, when the war is over, maybe the units were mingled, but not when serving. It was definitely all white and all black units.
This is more than once in the movie they go out of their way to show black people, not just in the context of the Southern prison. We also see middle-class black people very pointedly in the background when he is catching the train after his escape. I was taking note of that. Who would be responsible for making decisions like that on this picture?
Probably a combination. Well, it was Wallace, you said, that produced it. Wallace and...
This is the kind of thing.
Leroy.
This is the kind of thing that certain people at Warner Brothers were thinking about, and no other studio was. Occasionally, a particular director would think of that.
It's making most of its points obliquely.
As you had to.
It's not using any rhetoric about this stuff, but it's probably the most important aspect of the film when you look at it from the long view, right? They show the numbers, the prison industrial complex, which is a system of racial apartheid and white supremacist power in the United States today. It already was, clearly, in the 30s. You see that black prisoners are more than double the number of the white prisoners on this chain gang. The only black character who speaks on the chain gang is Sebastian, but he's presented very sympathetically. Certainly someone who is suffering just as much or more than the white prisoners who we spend most of our time with. I feel like the way the movie portrays it, you're left to imagine that the lot of the black prisoners is even worse than the people we see in the white barracks.
Sure.
When they actually show everyone being shipped off on the first day.
I guess we never see them being beaten because they're not sleeping in the same barracks.
No. But when we see them all being shipped off the first day, like that first morning where Paul Muni is seeing how it works, everyone is presented on the same level of suffering, right? We see very pointed close-ups alternate between a black prisoner and a white prisoner, and everyone is sympathetic. Nobody's being shown as someone who deserves this kind of treatment.
Okay, let's get into this because our listeners would be interested in this, I think. Why would even Warner Brothers, who, as you say, didn't have any theaters in the South, why would they have to be oblique in standing up for civil rights and commenting on the plight of African Americans?
Well, because African Americans were treated as second-class citizens everywhere, not in the South only in the United States. This was not something that...
And I guess it was untouchable because apparently they can protest any other kind of social condition.
Yeah.
But this is untouchable.
Through direct statement, yeah, I don't think it would have worked. I don't think it would have been something that you could get away with.
Them? The censors?
State censors, probably.
Speaking of censors, by the way, a lot of places censored Life Begins. Banned in Britain.
Oh, well, banned in Britain, sure. They
Everything
banned everything.
got banned. I bet I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang got banned in Britain.
It's not only censors, though, right? I think the main problem when you're dealing with Hollywood movies of the 30s is the white audiences that were expected to see these movies were thoroughgoing racist audiences. If you're going to do something to change their minds about any part of that, you can't just approach it head on and say, this is an unjust racial system. You have to do it through indirection. That's the only way. You show close-ups of a person suffering who is black. That's got more of a chance of actually striking a chord with someone than just telling them, hey, this is a racist society, because they're racist too, so they're not going to really be upset about that.
Sure, I guess, but you could more easily talk to them about social problems affecting white people?
Yeah, of course you could. There's not really any other way around it. The people of that time, the general person on the street in New York, just as in the South, was a thoroughgoing racist. That was the movie-going public. A lot of theaters were segregated themselves. It was only white audiences.
Well, that's why I'm wondering exactly who is the racially enlightened leftist on this film. Is it Wallace? Is it Leroy?
Probably all of them. Zanuck.
Is it Zanuck?
I mean, Zanuck definitely, we know his trajectory is toward all kinds of treatises on anti-Semitism and racism when he's at Fox.
All right. We'll leave it there because we haven't done the research. So.
No, I feel anyway that this film and Leroy's later film, They Won't Forget, also centers on a lynching of a white man, but manages to bring in racial terror.
Didn't you feel in that final chase scene that the prison guards in the open car with their guns, didn't it remind you of a posse?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay, so he makes his escape.
Beautifully shot and dramatized.
Which is an incredibly tense sequence.
Yeah, he's having trouble getting the shackle off one of his ankles, and he's got a very limited amount of time.
But the whole sequence.
The bloodhounds.
Is incredibly tense, and the reed that he breathes through, and the men approaching him, close to him in the water, about to step on him.
Do you remember when this happened a couple of years ago on my other podcast, which is sadly now dormant, Red Time for Bonzo? I was watching one of the Ronald Reagan Secret Service films, the B movies of the late 30s that Reagan starred in. During that one, he is part of a prison break and wades into some reeds and hides under the water. And because it's a Warner B film with a Foy unit, they did not waste time shooting things again if they already had great footage. So where it's supposed to be Reagan, it's clearly Paul Muni breathing through a straw at the bottom of the lake.
Right.
Noticed that for the first time watching that.
So we've got some very inventive cinematography here and...
The underwater cam,
very tense sequences, very tense escape scene.
The bloodhounds.
And then it continues tense after he gets into the city. No one has a southern accent, by the way.
No, that's true.
Because they're just saying this state.
Yeah.
Don't they actually say the South at some point, though? But nobody has a southern accent. Not the prisoners, nobody.
Probably Atlanta, right? So there'd be lots of people living in Atlanta at that time that wouldn't have accents anyway. Sure. They'd be sort of drifting around the country. They may not be from the South.
So luckily, Balmer has given him a bunch of money, $7, the equivalent of like $100 or something.
Yeah, and an address for Barney in the big city. So, I mean, yeah, these scenes are great too. We get some urban shots. Paul Muni looking very tense, walking down the street, knowing at any moment he could be ambushed by the law. And he gets himself a shave, he gets himself a new suit. Now show me something in a cheap hat. Well, he's getting shaved by Irving Bacon, one of my favorite little bit players. He turns up everywhere. Policeman comes in, and any moment there could be a discovery. He's actually giving a description, a generic description of Paul Muni. Nobody tumbles to the fact that it's him.
So really, this movie is more successful than any Hitchcock movie I have ever seen in making you identify with the criminal or the person who is, trying to pull something off against the law.
Oh, it's amazing. Barney is living in some kind of a bordello situation.
He appears to be a pimp.
Yeah.
Would this be Prohibition era? He seems to have some kind of liquor running.
Yeah, it's Prohibition, right? Because it's before the New Deal starts. So 1933 is when Prohibition is repealed as well. So that's all Roosevelt. It's a good place to hide out for the night. And
who is this actress? Which of
Noel Francis.
This is Noel Francis? What kind of career did she have? She's really good in this scene.
Yeah, I love her in this scene, but I don't remember seeing her in anything else, but clearly she's been in lots of things.
Well, we may see her in more things in this series, for sure.
Yeah, we'll look for her. I'm sure she never got
She's in the
starring
mouthpiece.
roles. She may have had lots of little roles like this. Maybe she got a chance to be a second lead in something. I don't really know. But yeah, she's incredible. It's a really great scene.
So Paul Mooney gets to have some comfort sex with a very kind and understanding prostitute.
This is the most intensely human soliciting scene.
She thinks he's cool because he made this prison break, so it's probably, better than her average clientele.
Yeah. She's like, I know what you're thinking. Don't worry about it.
And there are these amazing back and forth shots with her on the bed with the wrought iron at the foot of the bed. Just these really smoldering scenes.
And he's saying, no, there's nothing you can do for me. I mean, he's basically saying, I'm just passing through. I'm not the kind of person that hires a prostitute, even if I've been in a chain gang forever.
And probably not getting... Also, before that, I was in the army, and, and then in between, I was a tramp, so it's been a long time.
Meanwhile, looking at her in a way that implies that he definitely would like some human contact, and that's what she takes him up on that, rather than what he's saying. And then, he gets away. And that's a tense scene as well, as he gets on the train, they're looking for him, they chase after the wrong person, and then all the train employees...
And a little bit of paranoia as he's seeing the train employees talk to each other and look at him.
Yeah, but he does get away, and if you get outside the state line, you're safe, right? Those are the rules at this time with the kind of crime that he was convicted for. If he had committed a federal crime, then all bets are off. Like, let's say they had robbed a postman, then there's nowhere you can hide except across in Canada. But if you did something against Georgia law, well, then it's just Georgia that you have to worry about.
So then he manages, I guess the recession is over, and he manages to find a job.
Well, yeah, that's the amazing thing about this.
Working the pickaxe.
It becomes, there's a Horatio Alger story embedded in this.
Except for the fact that he doesn't climb the ranks out of the basic level of worker because he's some kind of natural genius. He got an education in what he's doing in engineering in the army.
He works his way up the ladder year by year. We see the typed employee record. Of
course, no prisoner could ever escape from the stigma of being a prisoner ever again now that everybody has a fucking SIN number. You have to show your ID to get a job.
A SIN number in Canada, SSN in the United States, yeah.
Sure. There's just no way you could never do this now, even have this little window of opportunity.
Yeah, he just reverses his name. He was James Allen, now he's Allen James, and he's a brand new person.
I don't know how they enroll you for taxes under this system, but whatever. He gets away with it.
Yeah, well, there was no social security number, right? That also comes in with FDR.
How did they do their taxes?
I guess it was just under your name, and it's withdrawn at the source, and that's it.
All right.
I don't know. That's something to look into. I'm sure there are monographs on the history of income tax.
But I was thinking about that because it is far worse. This is the only break he gets in the whole movie, and that would not be available to an ex-convict now.
So he's working his way up, and it takes several years, right? And his salary is going up incrementally. He does get a break because he makes some suggestions, and he has a boss or a supervisor who is willing to share the credit with him or actually assign the credit to him where it is due. He gets a promotion to foreman. He becomes a surveyor.
But unfortunately, he makes a very unwise decision.
Well, he's looking for a place. This is not right at the beginning, so he's probably living in some kind of flop house or boarding house. Then he starts to get a bit more money coming in, so he wants to get a place of his own, or at least part of a house of his own. There's a lady renting out some rooms at her place. It's Glenda Farrell.
She takes a shine to him.
Yeah, and she's willing to knock down $5 a month off her price to $20.
And he makes an unwise decision to, instead of getting another place to live, sleeping with this landlady to get a break on the rent.
Yeah.
And that really bites him in the ass.
Does. So yeah, and this is
because she turns out to be one of Warner Brothers' blonde Viper women.
Yeah, she's a terrible person, terrible character. I mean...
kind of a fun character too, especially those weird men she decides to date.
I wouldn't say that this is one of the glories of the film. I love Glenda Farrell. She's always fun, and she gets the most out of her lines, but it is kind of a misogynistic caricature.
And this is not the only time Warner Brothers has one of these women characters at this period. They're always taking the point of view of the working man who's being exploited by some bimbo.
So this woman...
Or shrew, rather.
She sees that he's a good proposition. She likes him, she wants to sleep with him, but also she just has the sense that he's gonna get on in life.
Or so she says in her completely implausible character.
Well, I don't know. I think that she does size him up as someone who is on his way up, and she's going to hitch her wagon to his star. But she also is incoherent. Maybe people are incoherent this way. I'm inclined to doubt it. She is very grasping and manipulative, but also very, very easily offended. You'd think it would be one or the other, but no, she's both.
She's a psycho bitch from hell.
She doesn't want him to study. She's always nagging at him to go out places with her.
Look, and he's just calm and reasonable the whole time.
Yeah, he's just, like, I took you out last night. I don't even like you very much. She says, and to think I believed you when you said you loved me. And he's like, I never said such a thing. Like, very blatant, very upsetting to her. This is a terrible domestic arrangement.
Yeah,
Things are going so well at work.
But then the stupid brother writes a letter to Paul Muni spelling out his situation as an escaped convict.
Yeah, well, this is all happening behind the scenes. We don't know she has this ace in the hole, this card to play if he ever tries to really get away from her. But she does imply, I know some things. You can't hi-hat me this way. And he's like, fuck off. I've got to study. I mean, he's really getting on. At the end of, 1929, so the last year of the good times, economically, in real life, in the timeline that all of us are living in, he has reached almost the pinnacle. He is hanging out with the boss of the firm. It's Robert Warwick, who is very familiar as a Preston Sturges guy.
Well, we get a kind of mini American tragedy where he also meets up with a kindly debutante who wants to marry him.
Well, yeah, but that all comes about because of his camaraderie with the boss, right? So they're looking over this gigantic, grandiose bridge plan that they've worked on together, and he's like, look, you've been working too hard. It's time for you to have fun with the country club set. I want you to join us tonight. Come with your wife, come without your wife, whatever. We're gonna enjoy ourselves for a change. Paul Muni agrees. We see the point that their sham marriage has reached. She doesn't even come home most of the time.
And she has bizarre boyfriends.
It's all just the movie doing implausible narrative things to cuckold him more and more and make him more of a
I don't like this
sad sack.
I don't like this as a movie character. Like, as a fictional character, it has very bad gender connotations, but I totally buy that this woman could have existed in reality. Because you couldn't invent this level of ridiculous bullshit.
She's off on drunken sprees constantly.
With her cousin.
Overspending continuously. His secretary comes in and says, your wife's overdrawn by $600. What do you want to do? Yeah. And when he gets home that night, there's just booze and cigarettes all over the place.
Don't we see, wasn't there some Warner's comedy around this period that we saw where Glenda Farrell is playing a role like this with the main character and she gets, beaten up at the end or something? You know what I'm talking about. I'm not sure if it was Glenda Farrell or not, but it was another Warner's blonde.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, we totally saw that movie. I'll look it up after.
Yeah, I don't know. Glenda Farrell usually plays a wisecracking gold digger that you're kind of on the side of, but she's usually not the one that
You don't remember a movie, though, where a woman is trying to extract alimony, a bleach blonde is trying to extract alimony from the main character, and he gives her a black eye at the end.
No, but I'm sure it exists.
That exists. We saw it together. For once, you don't remember a movie that we saw together.
Right.
All right.
The pièce de résistance is this phone call from this drunken nerd who says that Maurice stood me up, and don't tell her husband. Oh, listen. Not a word to her husband.
That was great.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, but it's really ridiculous.
So he calls her bluff, and then, of course, it's not a bluff.
Well, no, first he goes to this country club party, and that's where he meets Helen Vinson.
Yeah.
I love Helen Vinson. She is a great...
There's not even a role here, though.
No, but she's very lovable in this movie. She usually plays an evil other woman.
Oh, okay. Well, she got the other role this time.
Yeah, in this one, she's so sympathetic. It's true that there's not much going on with her character from her perspective, but it's very believable that she is appealing to Muni and...
Well, she's not crazy and she's rich, so... and she's young and pretty.
She's interested in his philosophical ramblings.
Oh, that's always good.
Yeah, well, to this guy, for sure. He's got a lot of thoughts. He wants people to listen to them. The other really sympathetic role that she gets to play is the wife in The Wedding Night.
Okay.
Which is an other woman role, but a very sympathetic one.
Our cat is snoring really loudly. I don't know if you guys can hear that. Probably not, but that is a loud snoring cat. Usually she just tries to disrupt our podcast, and we have to edit all that out.
This is highly preferable. Yes, he can see himself starting a new life with Helen Vinson. He goes home, lays down the law with Glenda Farrell, and she's like, all right, fuck you then. You're going back to jail, a convict. You filthy convict. She shows him the letter from Clint.
She's such a psycho.
Yeah. And he says, I don't care anymore. Anything would be better than serving out my time with you. And
no, she actually shows him the letter to get him to marry her.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is later, after the marriage has dragged on hellishly for a couple of years.
So he says, at the time he says, this is just as bad as the chain gang, but he has clearly forgotten what
How
the chain
bad the
gang
chain
was
gang
like.
is.
However, this is clearly intolerable.
It is, yeah. So, and to her credit, though, she goes through with it. She doesn't, she wasn't bluffing. She's right. And, she's really insulted when he says that this is like being in prison. Again, you'd think someone that manipulative would be beyond being hurt by a statement like that. But
that's why I think this woman actually existed.
She is furious. He's dragged in. I mean, this is I really felt it, right? He's having this meeting. He's being invited to the Chamber of Commerce to give this speech.
But what's interesting is, even as terrible as this scene is, when the detectives show up and they just, James or Alan or whatever your name is, you feel, or I felt, like the position he's risen to offers him some kind of protection. And the movie then goes ahead and shows you that it does not. No protection. And that's where this final twist is, where it just turns into the Kafkaesque nightmare.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's saying, look, this guy believed in the American dream, struggled a lot, finally got there, realized all of those ambitions, and then America, the country that he lives in and seems to believe in, pulls him back in and throws him into the pit of hell. Yes, it's just one state, but potentially any state could do this to you. That's how I feel about the movie anyway.
So they tell him, you're surely going to get a pardon. We've talked to this state, and they'll be agreeable to you getting a pardon.
Well, there's a representative of the state there giving these big speech. He's got a bit of a southern accent, this guy, and he's like, oh, he'll be given some clerical job, making all these suave promises, and he's like, it's just for everyone to save face, you gotta come back so we can pardon you officially. Otherwise, we're gonna have to keep hounding you.
And Paul Muni, like the husband at the end of Life Begins, is like, okay, I'm gonna trust these authorities. After all, what choice have I got?
Quite interesting that his attorney says, don't do this. I advise against it. Just stay here. Illinois is not going to extradite you, so just give them the finger.
Why does he want to do it?
Because he wants to clear his name. He wants to be pardoned officially. And of course, federal marshals can hound you. Let's say Illinois says, no, forget it. Under no circumstances will we extradite you. Well then, let's say he goes on a business trip to Ohio. He gets arrested again. And then Ohio decides, do we extradite him or not?
The only way I know anything about this is, of course, from the Polanski case, which he's guilty as hell.
Well, that's international extradition, but it works the same way between the states, yeah.
So anyway, as soon as this state gets him in their clutches, all bets are off. They can do anything they want to him.
Yeah, and they send him to the maximum security chain gang, he learns. When he gets there, Bomber is there. Bomber tried to escape after he did, and socked a guard. He died. Everyone there is basically, these are the toughest of the tough.
And they're all jeering at him like, you think that they put you here and they're going to pardon you?
No way. Forget it. You're living a pipe dream. And that turns out to be the case. The new warden says, all I know is if you get away from here, it's my job. So we're going to put the screws to you. Don't worry about it.
So he serves his 3 months, at the end of which his case is going to come up before their board.
Yep, and Clint goes in and pleads for him, and again, this is where, despite him being a caricature of an ineffectual priest or minister, he is putting in every ounce of sentiment that he can muster on behalf of his brother.
Sure.
He's giving the best case argument that a state should accept and go with. And the head of the parole board, this guy, the other major role I know this guy from, but I think he turns up a lot as a, tertiary character. He plays the defense attorney in Remember the Night. He's Barbara Stanwyck's defense attorney, where he gives this crazy speech about how she became hypnotized by the jewelry.
Right.
And it wasn't her fault. She wasn't responsible for the theft that she committed. Here, he's on the other side of the law. He gives this long speech. Basically, everybody explains that they were never going to pardon him because he gave all these interviews and tarnished the reputation of the state by talking about the brutal conditions on the chain gang. All he wants to say is that none of this is accurate. These are all lies. On the other hand, we're going to talk about how wonderfully constructive and character building the chain gang is.
Oh yeah, he attributes Paul Muni's success after he escapes to the chain gang, not to his army education or flinty character.
No, exactly. This is all...
The flinty character that allowed him to escape.
Yeah, this is all a result of the backbone that was instilled in him.
Discipline and punish.
Yeah. But we're not pardoning him. Forget it. Paul Muni at that point says, well, the state's promise didn't mean anything. Their crimes are worse than mine, worse than anybody's.
I know, he gives a flowery speech that's very annoying, but I started crying anyway.
I love it. I love that one. And again, that's key, right?
Their crimes are worse than ours, than any of ours, than anyone's in the world.
Yeah, because him saying their crimes are worse than mine is nothing, because we've seen his crime wasn't a crime. But he's saying their crimes are worse than anyone who's a murderer. Yeah. And I think it's true. And that's the movie's perspective. That's revolutionary.
Right, and then there's also the scene where after he agrees to serve his... Is this after
They want him to serve 9 more months, and then they're going to revisit his parole.
So it's after the 9 months that the guard comes and wakes him up, and though I've seen this before, again, I didn't remember exactly how it goes at every point, and so I'm just as tense as Paul Muni, waiting to hear what they've said, and when it turns out that they've suspended decision indefinitely,
yeah,
Muni's face at that point is incredible. That is his big moment in the whole film. The rest of the time he's just been kind of playing a reasonable guy in an unreasonable situation.
Yeah, no, there he really pulls out all the stops to convey the agony of his situation.
Yeah.
And at that point, it's like, whatever. I'm either getting out of here or I'm getting shot in the back of the head.
Whatever. Nothing
matters anymore. And Bomber feels the same way. He's already tried it once. We cut fairly quickly to them. We've seen a bunch of, before that, I guess, the calendar movement in time with the slave work songs.
Yes, so this is where they're really punching home the analogy or the identity of these systems.
Yeah, that it is, white people get caught in this, but it is primarily a system that is still oppressing black people more than anybody else. And it is rooted in the slave system, the inhumane system that was dominant in the South before the Civil War. It has just continued, basically.
And of course now, this also, not just in the South, it now affects black people in urban areas and...
Well, it already did.
Throughout the United States.
I'm sure once you have the Great Migration starting after World War I, this is when a lot of black people start leaving the South and showing up in Chicago, Detroit, etc. And I'm sure already right away they were starting to get arrested in disproportionate numbers because of racist police forces.
Which also affects First Nations, Canadians, and Native Americans.
Yeah.
Apparently Latinos very much so now as well in the United States.
Yes. Well, now this is kind of a perfunctory second escape sequence. It's not as tense, but
Bomber dies.
It's great.
And also they really get some good ones off throwing dynamite in the way of the posse.
No, it's great, but there's no build up to it. You just see them one day, they notice they got a chance to steal a truck, and they take it.
And the truck has that effective shield in back of it. I don't know if that was planned or fortuitous.
Works out really well. There's dynamite. Bomber describes that as his favorite candy, which is amazing. He gets a chance to bomb something. He bombs the side of a cliff. which delays the posse that is after them. Shotguns blazing. They are not trying to take prisoners here. It all culminates. Bomber dies. He gets shot. Falls out of the truck. Paul Muni goes back, observes that his friend is dead.
Yeah, there's Chekhov's exploding bridge. We first get explosions by a bridge when he is looking at his window from his shipping clerk desk.
Well, yeah, and not only that, though, right?
And dreaming about being an engineer.
Yeah, this is the visual rhetorical flourish that is the perfect companion of his insane speeches, because after all of this time looking to do something in the world and construct, the last thing we see him do, really, is blow up a bridge and destroy. And that's all he's fit for now after his...
Well, it's all he's allowed to do.
Exactly, after what the state has wrought of his character.
Then we get a very, very effective visual rhetorical flourish at the end.
Yeah, this is the most famous part of the film.
This is one of the most daring endings to a film I've ever seen, let alone a Hollywood film.
Very bleak. Attracted the interest of intellectuals everywhere, got it voted number 1 by a lot of people in Europe as well. Helen Vinson is locking up her car one night. She's going back to her apartment. It's been more than a year. We've seen a montage of newspapers saying, what became of the strange case of James Allen, second-time escapee from the chain gang?
He comes out of the shadows like, Laurence Olivier at the end of Carrie.
Yeah, he does. And he comes up to her and hugs her, kisses her, and says, I just had to take this one chance to see you and say goodbye, because I'm never going to be free of this. They're always going to be after me. I can't settle
my
down.
Job. Yeah.
Someone finds out about me and reports me, so...
And then as he withdraws...
She says...
With a great big, again, pulling out some theatrical expressions that he hasn't used much.
Yeah,
in the course of the film.
Haunted look. She says, how do you live? That's the last line.
He withdraws into the shadows like Dracula, and then you just hear his voice, I steal.
Yep, and that's the end. Now, the legend is that the lights went out on the stage when they were filming.
Oh, what a lie. This is a theatrical device being employed very effectively in a film.
I hope so. I would feel a lot better about it if it was a deliberate choice rather than just some incredibly fortuitous accident. But that's what they like to tell.
That's the legend.
Yeah. So yeah, that's how we leave it. There is no catharsis. He's just on the run, beaten down forever. He doesn't even get the dignity of dying. He's just going to be languishing.
I'm sure, actually, because obviously it bears no resemblance to the ending of the novel, I'm sure Wyler was actually thinking of this ending with the end of Carrie.
Yeah, maybe.
Because also Laurence Olivier, well, they weren't allowed to have him commit suicide, so he also does not get the dignity of dying.
No, just a social outcast.
Something I didn't mention in our Jennifer Jones details, did you know that Carrie, one of the reasons, or maybe the reason it didn't succeed at the box office, is that it was accused of being like a communist sympathizing film?
Yeah, I can see that.
Well, I mean, it was based on a Dreiser novel, so...
Yeah, so they all were.
Yeah. Even if Wyler himself was not particularly.
Wyler was
liberal.
On the liberal spectrum somewhere, sure. Which was enough to get you suspected during the Red Scare.
There you go. Yeah, any sympathy for any social criticism of the social system whatsoever.
But yeah, this movie, everyone that made it probably should have come under scrutiny by the right-wing lunatics that were running the show after World War II.
Did they? They did not. How did they not?
I guess it happened too early. Mervyn Leroy was responsible for tons of left-wing films at Warner Brothers. I mean, 5-Star Final, They Won't Forget. You'd think that would have got him in trouble, but thankfully for him, it didn't.
There were other people, more recent figures that were drawing attention away.
Yeah, well, he moved on to MGM after he left Warner Brothers, and he produced The Wizard of Oz. And he made a lot of great movies at MGM, including Random Harvest and Little Women.
The Wizard of Oz was clearly such a fascist endeavor that everyone just thought that he had switched political affiliations.
Well, one of his later films is the FBI story with Jimmy Stewart, which makes heroes of the G-Man during the Cold War. So that, I don't know what happened to Mervyn Leroy. I have no idea about him personally, but...
Or he was just saving his neck. We don't know.
Yeah, who knows? Many Leroy films of the 30s work really well as left-wing firebrand.
Well, of course, as we know, there was a lot of disaffection for the left. Some of it because of Stalinism, some of it because of McCarthyism, some of it both.
Yeah. And a lot of it just because of hardening of the ideological arteries after World War II and gung-ho Americanism that was a product of the hangover of VJ Day and VE Day.
Right, what we have to remember is that having a leftist or Marxist or communist or whatever type of affiliation isn't necessarily a character trait. Let's remember that this could be relatively popular, depending on the particular historical circumstances. An ordinary person could come to these conclusions. You don't have to have a special type of mind.
No, during the 30s, left-wing and socialist thought was definitely on the rise.
Among artists and intellectuals.
And regular people in unions as well. This is part of what FDR was trying to do. The New Deal was an attempt to meet people halfway and forestall a socialist revolution. And people allowed him to put these programs into place because even Republicans agreed at that point that there was some danger of a major upheaval that would be a lot more problematic to the capitalist powers that be than just some social programs and safety nets.
Yeah, but now they're not worried.
They don't seem to be worried anymore.
They're just not worried. We'll just let a lot of people die. That'll take care of some of the... Well, it may take care of some of the unrest. It may not. But maybe, again, I know nothing of history, but you can help me out here. Part of the reason they were worried then and are not worried now is because the Russian Revolution had happened, and so there was a global network of communists starting that had ties to actually powerful nation. Although they weren't powerful at the time yet, were they? They weren't what the Soviet Union became before, all the sanctions started.
Well, they were worried right away, right after.
That it could just become the idea of having a revolution itself, even without that network, could become infectious.
Sure, and while Lenin and Trotsky were running the show, there was still a lot of lip service. I mean, for Trotsky, it was always the main idea that Russia would just be the beginning and the revolution had to spread beyond the borders of Russia and knock down all of the governments around the world, or else socialism couldn't happen. Once Stalin is firmly in charge, exiles Trotsky, he says, no, we're just going to do it in Russia by itself, which obviously is not socialism. It wasn't socialism.
And it also couldn't succeed.
Not as socialism. It succeeded as a kind of willed experiment in forced industrialization. They managed to increase their productivity, ridiculously quickly.
Well, but I mean, also...
But it was done by very commanding means.
But as you've also often said, if you don't have global socialism, you can't have socialism because the other states will simply starve you out.
No,
the other nations.
They had no socialism. All they did was they managed to industrialize really quickly.
Yeah.
At the point of a gun. Better than what the Tsar was doing for the general public, but it wasn't good. It wasn't something to be very excited about. And they also, because they industrialized so quickly...
It was necessary, though. It was, economically necessary.
Yeah. They were able to fund shadow wars and proxy wars around the world, and they did have ties with socialists and communists in most countries. In the United States, it split up. There were people that were down with the Comintern and people who were socialists who were anti-Stalinists by the 30s. So you could take your pick of those. And the strategy, though, was the Popular Front in the 30s, Anti-Fascist Popular Front. So Stalin's directive was that, make alliances with anyone who wants to be an opponent of fascism. And in the United States, that mostly functioned as a kind of very loose leftism that was flavored with Americana. Like the kind of thing that you get in Devil and Daniel Webster, which is virulent criticism of the American system as is, but also presenting itself as kind of homespun. This is endemic to the United States. It's not an import from Russia.
Right.
And that was always what they were trying their best to foster, this idea of a homegrown American socialism.
Well, as Obama recently said, Bernie Sanders, he's an American original. We are not going to implement any of his ideas. But,
No.
It's very American to think the way he thinks, and also very American to not do a fucking thing about it.
Right.
So we've gone even longer than I thought on the second movie.
So we'll have a short segment here. You've got...
I have a little bonus. By the way, the reason I'm always bringing these bonuses, this little bit bit of extra film talk to these episodes and Dave is not is because Dave edits all of our podcasts. So his time is really taken up in other ways with this podcast.
That's true.
So if I find some little tidbit I want to discuss, he is here to react to what I bring.
Yes.
So what I have here is our Twitter account. Our buggy Twitter account is following the self-styled Siren.
Yeah.
And she tweeted this film comment interview with Douglas Sirk from the July-August 1978 issue. It's by James Harvey. You've encountered James Harvey, right?
Author of Movie Love in the 50s. That's a great book.
And Romantic Comedy
Yeah.
in Hollywood from Lubitsch to Sturgis, also a good book.
Yeah.
So we have no axe to grind with James Harvey. It's not a David Thompson situation. It's not a Molly Haskell or Laura Mulvey type of situation. No axe to grind with Harvey.
Well,
however,
Molly Haskell and Laura Mulvey have
no, we don't
recommend.
think they're useless.
No.
We only think David Thompson is useless.
He's the only useless one.
Useless. We just have disagreements with them. James Harvey, I don't remember the books in any great detail, but I remember enjoying them. So what I have to say that I found interesting and problematic about this interview and about the sort of overview of Sirk's career that he gives isn't so much about him as it is about the assumptions of film criticism at the time in the late 1970s, which would have been, the American flavor, the American version of cahiers auteurism, right?
Right.
And the sort of assumptions about what makes a good film and what doesn't, and how we should look at popular Hollywood cultural products. So here's where the problem starts for me, where he's giving this overview of Sirk's career, and he says, oh, and by the way, they do mention in the interview that it is Godard and the cahiers critics who performed the first revision on Sirk's reputation. It really seems to me more and more that, and we're going to dig further into cahiers, Dave actually wants to read all of the issues.
Yeah, it's something I'm planning to do.
I can't do that because I don't read French well enough, but he might be bringing that bonus sometime when he can find the time to do it.
Yeah, I've got all of the original cahiers, the first 300 volumes of it in French, and I'm planning to read through them just one article by one article, just to see what they were writing about, starting in 1951.
Yeah, maybe you can find some things that, aren't the greatest hits.
Well, yeah, the interesting thing is, the first article, I haven't read it yet, but it's on Edward Dmytryk's Christ in Concrete, which is a cool movie, but not one that you associate with cahiers pantheon status.
So anyway, it increasingly seems to me that the more I look into film history, that American critics just never brought anything of their own to the table. They were just repeating and amplifying what the French critics had said about Hollywood films.
Stanley Cavell and Ray Carney definitely did.
Yeah, but they're not introducing a revision of the canon and an idea of what makes a good Hollywood film.
Oh, I think they are.
Okay, well, we'd have to actually do their texts then in order to talk more about that.
And Elizabeth Kendall. We're going to do her book
we are going
later
to do
this
her
summer.
Book. Anyhow, here's where things get problematic for me. So Harvey writes, Sirk stands in a... Oh, hold on. God damn it. Oh, yes. Sirk stands in a trickier relation to his material, to the studio assigned stories, scripts, and often stars than any director I know of. Often that relation is an adversary one. An intelligent director confronting the world of Fanny Hurst or Lloyd C. Douglas confronts not only banality, but an even more virulent kind of falsity. The self-deceptions and consoling lies about life and human character that the tear-jerking mode exists to supply us with. John M. Stahl works the same territory, but differently from Sirk. Stahl tends to enlarge and transform his material where he can do so. Watching Backstreet or Only Yesterday, we often tend to forget the genre, but with Sirk's weepies we almost never do, nor is it part of his intention that we should. Sirk's imitation of life is in an important sense a movie about its own genre, about the genteel pop culture that it itself exemplifies. The characters do live in the world of Fanny Hurst. That is part of their interest for and connection with the rest of us. But we, the audience of the film, inhabit another level as we watch it, the world of Sirk's intentions and attitudes, his famous ironic subtext. So So what I'm going to say, first of all, is that this is a really great interview. It's really interesting. The ending of the film where Sirk talks about the transformation of society, German society under Nazi Germany, and how everyone turned on a hairpin, and particularly the intellectuals disappointed him, is very moving. The things that he has to say about the Hollywood stars he worked with, both the ones that he thought were good actors and interesting personas and the ones that he didn't, are incredibly intelligent, and he clearly, like, whatever he thought of the scripts he had to work with, he had clearly loved a lot of the people, a lot of the actors that he worked with in Hollywood, particularly Barbara Stanwyck. He absolutely adores her.
Well, that is not a surprise.
That's not very surprising,
but
right?
Did he like Rock Hudson?
He said we get a lot of detail about the characters and performers in Written on the Wind, and it's no surprise, it's no revelation that Sirk intended the movie to be weighted in favor of the Dorothy Malone and Robert Stack characters.
Yeah, sure.
And he said he chose them based on their qualities in other films, and then was surprised that they were both very good actors, too. And he also chose Rock Hudson and Lauren Bacall for their qualities, and these are qualities that he clearly thought lent themselves towards, well, in Rock Hudson's case, maybe a more lightweight and kind of shallow character, and in Bacall's, he keeps using the word ambiguous for Bacall, which is really fascinating. I don't know if he's talking about gender or sexuality, which I think she does give off a note of that, but anyway, and then he refers to her coldness too, and he says he wanted this character to have all of these qualities so that ultimately your sympathy is going to go away from these hale and hearty, successful people towards the doomed and tragic characters.
Right.
And he uses the same trick as is well known in Imitation of Life.
Sure.
Even to a greater extent with casting Lana Turner and Sandra Dee, although he does point out that Lana Turner, the movie was a great success for her, and she was tremendously happy with her performance and her role in it. And Lana Turner really let you know when she wasn't happy. So you can see what's problematic in this way of thinking about the melodrama or the tearjerker genre.
Well, running down Lloyd C. Douglas and Fannie Hurst, there's no need for that. These are really interesting writers, I think.
Well, see, I do think we've come to another moment, and it has to do with things that have happened in academia over the past decades. And I do think we are in another moment now where we are able to, like, it was daring at this point to be able to take even Hollywood movies in the tearjerker genre seriously, even if they were made by European intellectuals like Douglas Sirk. This was daring stuff. Or even he's defending John Stahl,
Sure.
who is not a European intellectual. He transcends the material.
The Last Frontier is the middlebrow novel.
Yes. And that is a frontier that Dave and I would like to cross, but we never seem to actually have the time to read them. We buy them.
Well, I've read a few of Lloyd C. Douglas's books, and I really find them quite fascinating.
So we got interested in Lloyd C. Douglas because of the number of his books that have been made into good films.
And Borzage worked on some.
When we saw White Banners.
Yeah, I love White Banners.
Right? Which seemed to have, like, almost every Lloyd C. Douglas movie made into a film is interesting.
Yeah, and he was a minister at a church in Montreal that I would walk by all the time on St. Catherine Street.
And so Sirk gives him, really kind of runs him down, says that Magnificent Obsession was one of his least favorite films. And I know, like, Guy and George Tolles, they stick up for that movie. And that's great. I love it when I have a differing opinion with somebody on a director I like and they will defend a movie that's not my favorite. But I agree with Sirk on this one. I don't think it's his best movie. He thinks his best American, well, not his American movie, but Ross Hunter movie is Written on the Wind, and I would agree with that.
Well, that's pretty common.
Well, but also Imitation of Life.
Yeah. Well, I don't think Magnificent Obsession is the best one, but I love it anyway. I mean,
actually, for me it is the weakest. I also love All That Heaven Allows almost as much, or maybe even more. Anyway, those are the top three for me. Imitation of Life, Written on the Wind, and All That Heaven Allows.
I think Magnificent Obsession is weaker than those, but still wonderful. And I'm biased towards anything that incorporates the Transcendentalist tradition into it so blatantly.
But he does find the craziness in it, which I actually prefer to the Stahl version. He does, like he said, the only thing that saved that piece of junk for me was that it is essentially a crazy story.
Yeah, of course.
Right? But Sirk can't seem to I don't know.
What's wrong with a crazy story? That's great.
Can't seem to take this transcendental attitude in all of its insanity, like kind of add a layer of like taking that insanity seriously. You know what I mean? That it maybe would require to be even better than it is.
Then you get too emotional. Then you're in danger of veering into fascism.
Maybe. The other interesting thing about the interview is where he keeps insisting. Now, of course, you have to realize he's doing this interview with James Harvey, who James Harvey himself keeps insisting on irony being so important to Sirk's films, right?
Well, that was the party line on Sirk at that point.
Well, because that's the only way that you could take these seriously as works of art if you understood the ironic subtext. So that's the context in which Sirk is answering these questions, but Sirk himself completely disowns any talent for sentimentality. So, seemingly, he himself, if he really, I don't know if he could possibly really believe that he can't make emotional, tear-jerking scenes.
Well, if he ever sat with an audience through a screening of Imitation of Life, he would have seen everybody crying, I would think, at the end. Did he think that was some kind of mass psychosis?
He says it's cultural, because he says in Germany, nobody thinks that film is sentimental. They think it's brutally cold, which it is. I mean, it's both.
They think Mahalia Jackson is brutally cold?
Well, he talks specifically about that, and he said that he was trying to recapture his experience of seeing her perform, and her being, in his opinion, a very strange-looking woman.
Okay.
And yet having this powerful emotional effect on her audience.
Yeah, sure.
And he wanted
She's one of the great singers of the 20th century.
And he wanted to recapture that effect, but I don't know if he thinks the fact that Mahalia Jackson doesn't have a movie star beautiful face somehow undercuts the emotion of the scene.
Well, that's weird. Yeah, that's not helpful.
Our options here are that Sirk either completely didn't understand what he was doing, or that he thought that the only way he could preserve his reputation as an intellectual was to disown his own ability as a director with sentimental scenes.
Yeah, I prefer to think of it as the latter. It's six-dimensional chess.
However, he does, and I think you've said this before. What were you talking about? Maybe with Sternberg, about the way that these films were recovered for intellectuals by the Cahiers intellectuals informed the way that the filmmakers felt they had to present themselves.
Yeah, sure. Well, Blonde Venus, right? Like, that is a very powerfully emotional story, and people can never talk about it that way.
Right, because apparently his story meant nothing to von Sternberg.
Yeah.
That was his story, and he was sticking to it, right?
And again, that worked for him as an elusive mad genius figure, but that is not consonant with what we see on the screen.
Yes, one of these days we want to get around to reading more of these middlebrow novels, and Fanny Hurst is she has a giant Wikipedia entry. Everyone should glance through it, because she is an absolutely fascinating figure.
Now, she wrote the story that Four Daughters is based on. She wrote Imitation of Life, obviously.
She was just a fabulously popular author in the in the early 20th century. Early on, her work was taken seriously. Throughout her life, Hurst also actively worked and spoke on behalf of social justice organizations and causes supporting feminism and African American civil rights, and occasionally supported other oppressed groups such as Jewish refugees, homosexuals, and prisoners. She was also appointed to several committees associated with Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal program. So this doesn't sound like your typical middlebrow author. Very advanced thinking.
Yeah.
For the time period. Early on, critics took her work seriously, and her second novel, Lummox, 1923, about the tribulations of an oppressed domestic servant, was praised for its insights by Vladimir Lenin, Leon Trotsky, and Eleanor Roosevelt. And she was good chums with Eleanor Roosevelt.
Cool.
Throughout.
Should have been the first female president.
But at a certain point, her work dropped out of favor with critics. Not having read it, I don't know whether they are correct that she is a grossly sentimental and sloppy writer. I have no idea how much of that was misogyny. Apparently,
I'm sure.
Apparently F. Scott Fitzgerald criticized her. F. Scott Fitzgerald seems to have been a raging misogynist.
Yeah, wrote some great things, but not a good person. Probably not someone you really want to be basing your critical opinions on.
And so it may just be the fact that this woman was a fabulously popular author who was also had very advanced social ideas.
Yeah.
Like Charles Dickens. Like, they just couldn't handle a female Charles Dickens, or the Dickens style had fallen out of style because now we were all modernists. I mean, the vagaries of critical reputations in literature in the 20th century boggle the mind.
No, I've always been really fascinated by people who kept writing in the more popular key during the 20s, 30s, 40s, when clearly the vogue had moved on to high modernism. This was more like ignoring modernism and continuing in the style of 1890.
Yeah.
But you can still write great novels. Virginia Woolf wrote a great novel before she became a modernist. That's just as good as anything she wrote afterwards.
Really?
Night and Day is a great novel.
Well, I didn't know that it was regarded that way as before her modernist period.
By me. Regarded by me. It's like a Dickensian 3-decker novel. Gigantic. It's wonderful. I really want to reread it because I don't remember all the details, but I just got really involved in it.
Well, don't worry, Dave. I'm writing one of those now, so you can read that one.
Good.
And all I can say now is that, as you and I have observed to each other, Sirk's Imitation of Life is a very, very great film. But the Stahl version, which is, as far as we know, much more faithful to the source, is a politically more incisive film in some ways. One of these days, for a special subject, we have to do the two. And at that time, we should actually read the novel. Okay, that's our promise to you. If we ever do those two films, we're also going to read the novel.
Yeah, I have it. I ordered it. It's on my shelf.
Yeah. If quarantine continues and we can't go to movie theaters for another year or so, this is going to get done.
Yeah. All right, Elise. Well, next week, we've got a special subject that I picked. Melville Français. This is just prompted by the random realization that two very great films, or great reputationed films, from 1999 made in France are based on Melville stories. So we're going to be talking about Léo Carax's Paula X and Beau Travail by Claire Denis.
Which is based on Billy Budd?
Yes, that's right. Paula X is based on Pierre, or The Ambiguities, which is always in the running for my favorite novel of the 19th century, along with Blithedale Romance and Middlemarch.
So, and I'm going to actually try to finish listening to the many-houred, unabridged audiobook, because I realized I was not going to get through reading the novel in time for this. I'm reading too many other things.
It's such a great book. And the movie, it's an adaptation that moves it to France in the 1990s. Does crazy things with it, as you would expect from Léo Carax during his glorious period.
Do you know he's now making a movie with Adam Driver?
Yeah, I don't know about that.
How did Adam Driver go from being the most interesting thing about Girls, a series that we did like, to now whenever I hear there's a movie with him, I'm like, not gonna see that. How did that happen?
Oh, one thing I should mention, actually, that you'd probably appreciate. It does seem to be more and more the consensus, kind of disreputable left perspective, that Girls was a great show, despite the fact that Lena Dunham is a terrible person.
Oh my god! Like, Lena Dunham has apparently never had a thought in her head, a political thought in her head, or maybe any thought in her head other than white girl power feminism and its representative Hillary Clinton.
But Girls doesn't read like
She's
that.
She's a funny comedian!
Yeah. All right, see you next week.